welcome to AAMplify, the Association for Accounting Marketing podcast. I'm Jessica Levin with 7 Degrees Communications, and today I am chatting with Jennifer Wilson from Convergence Coaching.
Hi, I'm Jen Wilson. I'm glad to be here, Jessica. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat with us. Today we're going to be talking about soft skills and specifically the marketer's role in identifying and developing soft skills for the professionals in their firms. So,
Great.
Jennifer, this is, we know, is an area that you spend a lot of time focusing your business on in terms of training. Do you want to just give us an overview of what you've seen in terms of soft skills development trends and what people are paying more attention to these days?
Jessica, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing in terms of trends in soft skills has been succession. The fact that we have 78 million baby boomers retiring in the next 10 years, let's say 10 to 12 years, leaving a pretty good gap. The baby boomers tended to be entrepreneurial and business development oriented, practice development oriented, and a lot of marketers are faced with the need to replace those skills in the next level of leadership, whoever that might be. I think that, and it's not just on the marketing side, it's across the firm, leadership and communication, marketing practice development, people development, all of those, what you might call soft skills are all in need of development and putting into focus in the new next generation of leadership. So I think that's the number one trend. And most marketers are sort of facing, how do I develop those skills when, in fact, they weren't necessarily valued or developed in the next generation, the Generation X behind the baby boomers. What happened is baby boomers started these practices, started selling services, got successful, needed help, hired Gen Xers, and said, come in here and help me implement all this stuff I've sold. And the Gen Xers really, kind of handled the back office implementation, and the baby boomers led the charge on practice. About 4 or 5 years ago, the baby boomers started to wake up to the fact that they weren't going to always be here. And they turned around to the Xers and say, hey, I hate to do this, but our deal has changed. You need to get out there and develop business. And so I think that's another thing to pay attention to in this whole story is, marketers are trying to develop business in people who haven't necessarily thought it was valued or felt like it was part of their repartee until recently.
Okay, so that's a really great background. So let's break it down a little bit from the marketing perspective in terms of a marketing director, marketing professional's role within the firm, specifically what steps they need to take in order to start working with their professionals on their soft skills development.
Okay, so I think the biggest thing to do is to identify who the folks are that are really going to this next generation leaders who are going to do practice development. And I'm gonna focus my soft skills discussion for this purposes mostly on practice and business development. Those require leadership and communication skills as well as the willingness to go out in the community, build relationships, develop expertise, build some thought leadership. There's a whole bunch of things that go into becoming a practice developer. And I think that's the number one challenge facing our marketers. So that's where I'm going to focus my soft skills orientation. And I think that the first step is to identify who are the people who are going to do it. My philosophy and our philosophy at Convergence Coaching has been really we need an opt-in program. It's not a court-ordered mandatory, you are a young partner or you are a manager, senior manager, director, principal, you have to do it.
Right.
A lot of firms do say that. They'll say to sit at the partner table, you have to be a practice developer. I always say, okay, all practice developers, real ones at the partner table that end up. The rest of you, we know full well aren't really doing it. There's this idea of rainmaking. And I like to say that, a whole lot of partners in firms today are mist makers. They're not rainmakers. They're just making a little bit of mist, maybe. And if we could be honest about that, we could recognize that the next generation of rainmakers is not all managers, senior managers, directors, principals, and young partners. It's some number who feel called to it. So my first step, if I'm a marketer, is to convince my firm that we need to do an opt-in program and offer people the opportunity to get these skills. And those that say, I want it, are very likely then to be able to, to put the focus and emphasis and time and energy into practicing the skills. And that's kind of an approach we take. The next thing is to devise a program of what skills we need to transfer. I mean, what are they? And, in training, there's the 70-20-10 rule. It's, I'm going to go from 10-20-70 because this is the way we think about it in CPA firms. We do a lot of classroom training in CPA firms, or a lot of structured CPE. That's 10% of learning comes from structured CPE, which is weird because that's where about 90% of firm budgets are. 20% of learning really comes from the process of reading and self-study and that sort of thing, and 70% comes from experiential. And so, I learned 70% of my skills and abilities doing stuff, or witnessing it, or participating in it, or shadowing it. I don't learn them necessarily in classroom training. A lot of firms will come to us and say, we've got rainmakers, we're kind of court ordering this group. We want to put them, we want you to come to a 2-day workshop and make them rainmakers or business developers. And I say, that's a 2-day workshop will kill them. It's way too much, and they're only going to learn information and become knowledgeable. They're not going to become capable. And there's a huge difference between knowing and doing. And so if I'm a marketer and I have to transfer soft skills, I have to think about experiential learning. It's crucial. And I have to think about bringing that experiential learning, into different sorts of small bites. And I'll give a couple of examples. One is, if I want to teach people how to build community, I'm going to, maybe take one small bite, and it's going to be what we would call old school networking. And I'm going to talk about not just, what kind of associations make sense, and how important it is to pick associations you're drawn to instead of the ones that the firm does, or that some partner do. But also talk about things like, what's it like to go into a room full of strangers you don't know, and how do you break in, and how do you enter a group and not feel awkward, and how much talking am I supposed to do versus asking questions, and do we still trade business cards, and what's a handshake like, and how do I get rid of somebody that's creepy, which is silly, but those are the kinds of things these people need to talk about. And then you do a small bite of education and then send them out to do the experiential piece, which is, maybe shadow a partner or shadow somebody at networking events to try some of the things you taught them. And then they come back and you give them another bite, and the next bite of community might be social media, something like that. And you teach them the tools, and then you send them back out and they have assignments to do. That's how we believe that soft skills need to be transferred, specifically and most importantly, the personal marketing and business development ones. Super important that they do as much as they learn or know.
Wow, that was a lot of information. I really love that you gave no. I love that you gave some specific examples. I think that's really helpful to the A members listening. So we've talked about what marketers can do, but a lot of this might sound a little bit like an HR role, and HR being responsible for professional development. So from your experience and working with different clients, what is the role and how do they work together of an HR person and a marketer?
Gosh, I love this question. We could throw in internal communications into the mix too, because that's the other weird place that marketing and HR kind of have a standoff. Internal communications and personal skills development, I think, are real strange no man's land. Maybe recruiting also, put those all three. So, in my world, which is kind of fantasy land, I would like marketers and HR professionals to be partners, to do everything they can to have blurred lines, not hard lines. And, fundamentally, I believe that HR owns what I'll call people development. They own that training, learning, performance management, competency management, all of those things. They do own getting that stuff defined, and they own figuring out how to deliver it programmatically. and how to train people to do a lot of the coaching and support. In the 70-20-10 model, 70% is that experiential, 20% is some self-study sort of stuff, but also a lot of coaching and mentoring. And, HR needs to teach people to be good coaches and mentors. And I do programmatic learning, and those kinds of skills transferred to the mentors and to the trainers is HR's job. That said, HR and most of the people in the firm don't really understand best practices in marketing and best practices in business development. That's the marketer's kind of domain of expertise. And so building curriculum to teach those skills, teaching the trainers to train the internal trainers on those things, finding external providers, I feel like that's marketing's role. And marketing needs to figure out what is the curriculum that we need to teach. And also I think marketers have to input almost every single firm's competency models when they get big enough to start developing them. A competency model, is essentially the skills areas or buckets that you want by level. And the competency model has a row called personal marketing or business development, and the competency they're supposed to develop across associate, senior, supervisor, manager, and up. And so, if I'm marketing, I want to input to what should be expected competencies at each level for each discipline in the marketing or business development rows of the competency model of the firm. So I think that's another place that they overlap and that they should be partnering. Now, depending on the size of the firm, they may have learning best practices. They may have processes for managing CPE, processes for, evaluating the quality of the training and learning, all those things. I don't want to leverage that if I'm the marketer. So I want to partner with whoever's doing learning on the HR side. I think there's a really close relationship there. And if there is no HR function and I'm marketing and I know I've got practice developers retiring in the next 5 years, I'm not going to stand around and hope someone else is going to build my next generation of developers. I'm going to have to go out there and convince the firm that that's an initiative we need to do.
Okay, so I think the message is work together, and if there's not somebody in that leadership role, if you don't have an HR person, that it is the marketer's responsibility to step and get involved in the development of the professionals for the greater growth of the firm. Jennifer, we're almost out of time. Do you have any closing comments just on this whole topic of soft skills, specifically from the business development perspective, that you think would be really strong takeaways for the listeners?
Well, I have, I want to share a philosophical sort of radical stance that I have maybe on this subject, and that is that, I promote the two-track system. I am really anxious to have firms start that the best practice developers, best people developers, best relational folks in our profession often leave us before their 5th year. We have a very technically oriented profession where we value those technical skills so much that those that have the soft skills that you mentioned, those that have that, that wonderful communication ability and wonderful relational ability, they often don't have as high a technical IQ. The higher the relational IQ, the lower the technical, and vice versa. And sometimes you find the unicorn that has both, and they're both high, but it's rare. And in our profession, we chase off the high relational IQ people. They don't feel like they fit in the first 5 years. And so we get these highly technical people we prize. And at the 5th or 6th year, people call us up at Convergence or other people that do development, and they say, this is a super technical person, turn them into a relational person now. Create relational skills in them. And we can do some of that, but the innate relational stuff doesn't exist in a lot of those folks. And it's really challenging. And so, when you do opt-in programs for practice development, training, or learning, and you do opt-in programs for people development, if you say, we're going to build a mentor program, and only those people who want to mentor and are good at it can do it, raise your hands, you end up with a small pool of people in the profession, a small pool that raise their hands. And I should go back in our firms and think real hard about the first 5 years and find people that have soft skills innately early and put them on a different track and expect different competencies and not highly technical reviewers, but instead great people developers, great practice developers, focus their responsibilities differently earlier. And I think we'll keep more of them. It's just something I think marketers should be thinking about and talking to HR and their leadership about.
Well, I think we all need a little bit of some radical thinking. So we thank you and appreciate your perspective. Jennifer,
Thanks.
Thank you very much for your time today. Jennifer Wilson from Convergence Coaching. I'm Jessica Levin with 7 Degrees Communications, and this is AAMplify, the Association for Accounting Marketing podcast.